also at the same time, there are some things that you cannot see. There are things you cannot touch, and there are things that you just cannot like physically, deal with. What are some of the things that we can see, and what are some of the things that we cannot see? When we look at a person, the external shape of that person, right? However, there are things that you cannot see about that person. For example, love, character, integrity, and the faith of that person. Can you guys see such things? No, we cannot. This is how God made us human beings. There is the physical, the things that we can see and touch and feel, right? There's the physical. And there's the spiritual, the things that you cannot easily see, feel, and touch. And this is how God has formed us human beings. He combined those two, He merged those two, and that's who we are. Are we physical beings? Do we need food, air, and water? Yes. However, are we only physical things? Do we need things like love and faith, compassion, affection, and concern for other people? Do we also need those things? Yes, because we are also spiritual beings. We human beings, because we have a tendency to focus a little more on the physical things. When you imagine a person, you imagine almost immediately in your head what that person looks on the outside, right? But when our God looks at us, He's not so much concerned about the external features of our body, but He looks straight into our hearts. He looks straight into our character and into our faith, and God says, okay, that is who my child is. In the Bible, it talks about sometimes the things that we cannot easily see, and that is why sometimes it's hard to make sense of those things. And today I want to break things apart and break things down on what Romans 6 tells about us, about at the core of who we are when God sees us. So let's read chapter 6 and verse 6 all together in one loud voice. 1, 2, 3. We know that our old sinful selves were crucified with Christ so that sin might lose its power in our lives. We are no longer slaves to sin. This verse tells us there is this part of who we are called our old sinful selves. Repeat after me. Our old sinful selves.
Our old sinful selves.
Clearly, the Bible says something that we don't easily see about who we are on the inside. There is the old sinful selves. When the Bible looks at us, there's old self, right? When there's the old self, what is the other? What's the opposite of the old self? It's gotta be the new self, right? So when the Bible looks at us, okay, here's a person, but this person actually has an old self, and there is a new self. Just as, in a soccer match, there is that first half, and there's the second half, right? And what determines the first half and the second half? Halftime, right? And when you turn a certain age, there is that decisive moment. Before turning something like that. Anyways, but there is that decisive moment where we're living as our old selves. But now after this decisive moment, you are going to be a new version, a new self. And what is that decisive moment? We can call that moment in different ways, different terms. It could be the moment where same thing. It says our old selves were crucified with Christ. Now let's try to unpack that a little more. What happens when Jesus or somebody is crucified on the cross? It's a moment of death, right? When you are crucified on the cross, it means a certain death. But what does it mean that when our old selves were crucified with Christ? Crucifixion was a method of giving people a death sentence, right? But we're all living. To us physical human beings, we're so used to like the physical life. When do we die? When do we die? I actually learned that there are many definitions of when we die. Some people think that it's when we stop breathing, when our heart stops beating, when our blood stops flowing. But when the Bible looks at us, because the Bible looks at us not only as physical beings, but also as spiritual beings, there are some people who we think, that person's alive. But when the Bible looks at that person, that person is actually dead spiritually. And when a person, in the human eyes, we could say, that person is dying, that person is languishing. However, the Bible looks at that person and go like, man, that person's living. That person's living with Christ. Where is the difference? And the Bible talks about crucifying our old sinful selves to the cross. And let's read verse 8. 1, 2, 3. And since we died with Christ, we know we will also live with him. When the Bible looks at us, we need to be crucified with our old selves so that we can truly live. When you look at your lives, there's an old self and your new self. Before being crucified with Christ and after being crucified with Christ. My old self likes to sin. My old self likes to not listen to other people, but only listen to myself. My old self doesn't like being in the presence of God. My old self loves telling other people what to do, and my old self likes who I am on the inside. But my new self loves coming before God, and my new self loves worshiping God. My new self loves other people, and my new self, I love to come before the presence of God. Now, let me ask you, which self are you living your lives by? Are you living by the old selves, by your old sinful selves, or have you crucified yourself with Christ, and are you now living as the new self? I'm going to give you one reminder of what it means to live with Christ. We're not actually going to crucify you on the cross, because that's a little scary and gory, but this is what it means. It means you come before the cross and you lay yourself down. That's what it means. You lay down who you are. You lay down all of your worries, all of your pride, and all of who you want to become, and you put everything down on the cross, and you let Christ come inside your heart and take control of your life so that you can live as your new self. I want you to ask yourselves, am I living as my old self, or am I living as a new self, which basically means Christ living in me? If you have not met the Christ, and if you feel like, man, Christ is not living in me, I want you to really take this time to pray and, for your old self to come before the cross and invite Christ into your life so that Christ takes a driver's seat in your life. Let us